We have another good guest coming your way right now as we go to our guest line to bring on David Ubben, national college football writer for The Athletic. Wrote a profile on Fran Brown, which dropped on Friday just before Syracuse went in and knocked off Clemson down in Death Valley. David, thanks so much for the time. We appreciate you coming on. And, let's start with the time you spent with Fran. What was it like kind of getting to meet him, getting to know him, and doing the story on him?
I mean, he's an intense guy. He was at the top of my list, honestly, this offseason for just, interesting people in the sport. Because, I think when you're a college head coach, there's a lot of pressures to be a lot of people, and he seems to just sort of be Fran at all times. And there's not a lot of Frans in college football, so I wanted to kind of get to know, how did we get to this point? Why are you the way that you are? And, the Trevor Pena situation I thought was super interesting. And so I think, it's a story about Fran, but I think also it's a story about the hiring practices in college football, and that, everybody wants the hot coordinator, and nobody's looking for, a person who has a plan to run their program and understanding people and delegation and all of those things. And I think that there's been so many hires in this sport over the last 20 years that are oh, we like that offense, we like that defense, we want to bring it into our program. When, that's such a small part of being a head coach. And Fran seems very interested in doing all of the things that are involved in being a head coach. But he didn't have the name recognition. He was a position coach, but it seems like a prescient hire. And then I think also just talking explicitly about the money in college football. He just does things very differently than we've really seen, and I think his hire was very different. And so he was at the top of my list of people that I really wanted to write about this offseason. So it was great to get a chance to get some time with him and talk to people about him.
I thought one of the most noteworthy parts of the piece was that you mentioned in the piece, John Wildhack said that when Fran called him, that John was actually planning on calling Fran next, which is that's the first time I had heard that, because the story that we had heard was that Fran kind of called him out of the blue. John was just about to get on a flight, and he was like, all right, let's talk. They set up a time to talk. They ended up talking for 2 hours or whatever it was, and kind of the rest is history. But we had not heard that. So can you speak to that John was very much ready to give Fran a call, which we had yet to hear that.
Yeah, I think I sort of alluded to it in the piece, but a lot of people seem to be kind of in John's ear about Fran Brown, and that, his connections to the Northeast and his, recruiting acumen and the vision that he kind of had for his program and aiming higher on the field, on the recruiting trail, were a good fit for what they kind of wanted Syracuse to be. And so I think he was intrigued by him. But, I mean, you spend any time with Fran, you can see how he wins people over because he's sort of unapologetic in his aspiration and how he views himself. And you sort of have to have what seemed like a year ago to be some irrational self-confidence. And then, a year later, that self-confidence doesn't look so irrational. So when he's talking about national titles and doing all these big things at Syracuse, well, if he was talking about winning 10 games and signing 5 stars a year ago, people would have scoffed as well. And that, there seems to be a lot less skepticism, and especially that's true coming off of, a weekend when you go down to Death Valley and kind of push Clemson around.
You mentioned in the piece that Todd Bowles was one of the coaches that called John Wildhack unprompted when he heard that Fran was in the running for the job. What are other coaches in the industry? What were they saying about Fran at the time? What are they saying about him now? It seems like he's got a lot of friends in the industry.
I think just, a lot of kind of what we put in the piece is that Fran is Fran at all times. And, hard worker, recruiter, a guy who understands people and relate to people of all ages. And obviously, a guy that has a ton of ambition and isn't going to settle for we need to go 8-4 because if we go 8-4, we're going to meet expectations. That's just not in his DNA. And, I think that is something that Syracuse felt like they were kind of missing. And so, I think the thing from John's perspective is he talked to so many people and just kept hearing the same things and a lot of consistency. And then, you sit down with him and you see some of those same things. And then now, obviously, in the last year and a half, you've seen that play out. And like I said, I just think Fran was such an unorthodox hire in a lot of ways. And everybody's so tied up in we got to get a guy that's tied to our school. We got to get, this guy because we got to sell it you guys can speak to this more than I can, but like, I don't think people are that excited about bringing Fran Brown to Syracuse. He's not splashy. He doesn't really have a lot of name recognition, or didn't, when he was hired. But if you're an AD and you're doing the work of a coaching search, and you say, okay, I think this guy's a really good fit. I think this guy's going to thrive in this role. When you're on the ground talking to people, you have to do that. And I think there's so much emphasis in the sport now on winning the press conference and having a splashy hire and making headlines, and there's a lot of that going on in Chapel Hill right now.
Sure.
And like all this stuff. And it's like, but who's going to help the program thrive? Who's a good fit for what we need to be, and not just because he has a degree from our school or used to play here. Like, I just think John seems to think about this hire in a different way, and I think a lot of ADs could do that and could succeed in doing that similarly, rather than, like I said, having the splashy guy, having the guy that, well, he was here before, or he's got bona fides here. I just think some of that stuff was really overrated, and especially now that running a college football program, coaching football has never been less of the job. And you just have to have a coach who is interested in, yes, you got to coach football, but you've got to be interested and invested in all the other parts of the job that aren't as glamorous and aren't as fun, and he seems to do that.
There's no doubt it was a risk at the time. I mean, John Wildhack had laid out what he was looking for, the criteria, and one of the criteria was head coaching experience or experience as a coordinator, and Fran didn't have either. And so when he announced that this was his guy, that everybody said, well, that box wasn't checked. So there's no doubt that it was a risk at the time. It's obviously paid off. They're 13-4. Fans around here are loving it, but they're also concerned. We just had somebody call right before you came on about how long is Fran going to be here for? What kind of job might he leave here for? And I don't know if you got a feel for that at all, but let's say, they just beat Clemson. They're 3-1. Let's say they go 8-4 this year with this really tough schedule. Do you think he's going to get interest from other programs? And I guess what level of program might be interested in Fran Brown should he continue to succeed here?
I think a bunch of programs are going to be interested. You have a guy who has done things at Syracuse that are really hard to do, that has garnered excitement through, just a lot of authenticity. He's not hosting pep rallies downtown. He's just like, we're going to focus on winning and trying to get good players and develop the players that we have at Syracuse. And so, he's going to have a lot of interest. I think there's going to be some big SEC jobs that when they open up, whether or not they offer him, I don't know, but I think he'll get some calls. And, what he wants to do, what he sees for himself, I didn't really talk too much about that. But I think the thing with Fran is he seems like a person that's very much in the moment. And, he said it in the piece, and I thought it was pretty interesting. The stages are created by the people on them. And so I don't think he feels like to fulfill his destiny or whatever, he's got to be at Georgia or Alabama or whatever. But I think he's a guy who lives in the moment and sort of thinks about tomorrow and thinks about today. And so I don't think he's thinking about that. But, if it's the end of the season and, Florida's calling him up, or I don't know, if Ole Miss is calling him up, if Lane leaves, something like that, I think you'd have to think about it. Whether or not he does or doesn't take it, I don't know. But I think it'd be I'm sure he will get interest, if Syracuse continues on this trajectory. And, the schedule being what it is, I think that's going to be tough. And maybe if another guy is going to get hired, he's going to have to, maybe they'll win 7 games, 8 games this year and be better than people think because the schedule is so unforgiving. But, we'll see. It's going to be interesting. There's a lot of variables. Like I said, the schedule, what Fran wants to do, what these SEC jobs look like, how all those things play out. I think there's a lot of variables. But,
sure.
To answer your question, I think absolutely he's going to be getting some calls if the trajectory of what they're doing at Syracuse stays even close to what it has been.
And with that in mind, we mentioned they're 3-1. They just knocked off Clemson. But, as you know, they just lost their quarterback, Steve Angeli, with an Achilles injury. Just had surgery yesterday. He's out for the rest of the season. Where do you put Syracuse right now in the ACC race? Or, how do they stack up in the ACC conference right now, knowing that they're about to go to their backup quarterback for the rest of the season?
Well, I think you need to see more from Ricky Collins. I don't know that I see them contending this year. In part, I'm not sure they have the guys. I saw the team in person in week 1 in Atlanta. I'm not sure they have the dudes to necessarily compete at the very, very top with teams like Miami and Florida State. And Clemson's just kind of a mess right now. So obviously, I don't think you can throw them in there. We'll see what SMU is as time goes by. But ultimately, I think they're going to be a tough out for everybody. But that schedule, I think you can put up their schedule. Them in Florida, I haven't seen two tougher schedules in the country this year.
Yeah, no doubt. It's very difficult. All the tough ones are away, as we know, and even the ones at home. They've got Duke coming in this week, and Duke is much improved from the Duke of past. So it is a very demanding schedule. I do want to get to the news yesterday out of the ACC, and that was Syracuse was fined $25,000 for faking injuries. It's not just a Syracuse thing, right? It's this is kind of going on around the country, and conferences are doing their best to kind of nip it in the bud. What are your thoughts about conferences fining teams, if they can determine that they faked an injury?
I think everyone involved in this sport would like to get faked injuries out of the game. And if you're doing it, which a lot of teams are doing it, and you get caught, I think you're subject to, the penalties the conference has put in. The rule they put in, this year about the spotting the ball and taking the timeout, it's an imperfect solution. The reason why you haven't seen draconian measures come on is I think schools are very nervous about guys who are really injured, pushing through or hurting themselves worse or putting themselves in danger to not come out of the game because, they're going to sit out the rest of the half. They're going to sit out the rest of the drive or this or that.
Right.
But when it's pretty explicit and you see, guys going down that look like they're pretty healthy, that's a problem and you got to get that out of the sport. But then there becomes an interpretation where okay, maybe a guy is limping and he's not going to be able to perform on the next play, and then coaches are telling him to go down. Hey, go down so we can take this time out and whatever. There's just a lot of pitfalls for it, but I don't have a problem with schools and coaches and all that stuff being penalized when it's pretty clear that, this was a fake thing. And I think certainly, Clemson had a lot of frustration about it as well. This has been a thing for a long time since tempo offenses, have come on. When you have a big play and everybody's rushing up to the line and all of a sudden, the cramps, I got a cramp. What should I say? Listen, it is what it is. I generally think it's unsportsmanlike, but it's a strategy, and the rules to protect against it are imperfect. And so, it is what it is.
Yeah, as you said, it's been going on for a while since teams started going up tempo. We saw it a lot when Dino Babers was the head coach here. He wanted to go fast, and opponents would fake injuries quite a bit to slow them down. And now, conferences are trying to put an end to it. Lastly, David, as long as we have you just talking ACC stuff, they announced yesterday that they're going to go to this 9+1 scheduling model, 9 conference games, 1 Power 4 opponent. So, 10, a minimum of 10 Power 4 opponents every year for everybody. You think it's a good move for the league, good move for college football that a lot of the conferences are going in this direction?
I think you have to. In my perfect world, you have much smaller conferences. You'd play 7 conference games and then have 5 non-conference games and get a lot of diversity in the schedule. But with the super conferences being what they are, you can't do that. You got to play your teams in your conference. I don't really like the current, situation that college sports finds itself in, but there has to be an equality in schedule. The fact that college football, half the major leagues have been playing 8 games and half been playing 9 is so insane. I've always compared it to what if the NFC played 16 games and the AFC played 18 games and they just went in the playoff? That's crazy. But nobody's in charge and the sport is what it is. And so you need to get to this, everybody's got to be playing 9. I like the one, P4 requirement that I think every league has that. Whether it's in writing or not, most teams seem to really do it. So, I think you just have to this is what it is. The sport needed to get to this place. And, the SEC seemed like they got dragged kicking and screaming there. And once they did, it felt like a matter of time before the ACC kind of had to follow suit.
David, great stuff. We really appreciate you coming on. We appreciate the time. Thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of the college football season.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
David Ubben from The Athletic.